member of the United States House of Representatives from the 4th District, Ron Estes. Let's give him a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Well, good afternoon, or late morning, right? So it's great seeing everybody, and I'll just start off with answering the first question. No, Susan is not here. That's what I've been asked by several times. She's actually at the State Fair today. She is co-chair of the Kansas 250th anniversary celebration for the United States. So the semi-sesquicentennial. So that's a mouthful to say. So they've got a booth up at the State Fair trying to encourage folks to bring out ideas that are related to Kansas, tying back to the celebration that's going to happen in 2026 on our 250th anniversary. So, but it's good to be back and seeing all of you, and nice to be here with some old friends. So I just want to talk a little bit about what's going on in D.C. and just kind of open up the discussion before we get into some questions. Excuse me. We do have some slides too with some of the comments that'll come up in the midst of this. But we typically do a survey about 2 or 3 times a year, just kind of polling what the top priorities are in the folks in the 4th District. And the most recent survey came back. And number one issue was border security and immigration. Second issue was federal debt and deficit. And the third issue was inflation and rising prices. And then the last issue, or the fourth issue, there were others below that, but the fourth one was in election integrity. So those top 3 have kind of been the top of the list, the top 3 for the last year and a half, 2 years in terms of the survey. And so it's continuing. They move around a little bit depending on what's the news of the day and what's important out there. So I just thought I'd start off talking a little bit about the top issue, talking about border security. And border security and immigration are related, but they're two separate things. I mean, our immigration system needs some work. I mean, we're a nation of immigrants. The United States has more immigrants coming into their country legally than any other country in the world, and we'll continue to do that. And it will grow and help make the economy stronger. But even that process is there's broken steps along the way if you're trying to come in legally. And so there's some things that need to be done there. If you come here on a student visa and you get educated in one of our great universities in the country, then it's difficult to get a work visa and stay in the country. So we educate you and then send you back to your home country to work against American businesses, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense in that process. We have trouble with visas for temporary workers as well. We unfortunately, there's a lot of people that want to demagogue about how this is a problem instead of trying to focus on how to solving that. But unfortunately, right now with the border security and the openness on the border the last 3.5 years, it's taken the attention off of focusing on immigration and just addressing where we're at on border security. Just as a matter of reference, if you look at the last 3.5 years, there have been over 10 million people that have crossed the border illegally. And these are the folks that have been stopped by the Border Patrol, and I say stopped. They've been encountered, there's a better word of what's being used. And basically this means they come across the border at a point that's not a legal checkpoint. And I'll use as an example, in Eagle Pass, Texas, there's a legal crossing point there. There's for both pedestrians and vehicles. But 200 yards away is a shallow part of the river, and so you have people crossing over there illegally. They intentionally avoid the legal crossing point and just cross through a shallow point in the river because they can get across. And just as a frame of reference against that 10 million, there were roughly 3.1 million, about 3.1 million in fiscal 17 through 20, just as a comparison. And basically what that is because our current immigration laws allow the president to make some decisions about how they enforce and what they are enforced. And President Trump chose to use those provisions to implement them. President Biden's chosen not to, and instead allowing all these folks to come across the border. And for example, President Trump worked with Mexico to have a Remain in Mexico policy that actually was enforced and was working. And basically what that means is it's standard practice for countries around the world that if you're seeking asylum for political reasons or personal reasons, you apply for asylum at the first country you're in after leaving your home country. And so typically when President Trump was in office, because so many of these people came through Mexico, the expectation was that they'd apply for asylum in Mexico, as opposed to passing through Mexico and then coming into the United States and requesting asylum here. President Biden's policies have been, let's let them all come into the United States instead of following the normal process. And when I talk about this, the thing that really jumps out at me is that it's not people from Central America and South America. There are people from over 160 countries that cross into our border illegally to come into the country. So it's actually a racket. The cartels are making literally billions of dollars a year by selling passage to these folks from around the world, China, India, Romania, Russia, just all over the world coming through, because they know once they come in, they can have time to spend in the United States. I'll give you another example of current U.S. law that President Biden is not enforcing that President Trump enforced. There's a process called parole in our immigration system that basically says the intention was somebody coming into the country may have a reason for a temporary access to the United States. Maybe they're sick and they need medical treatment. Maybe they have a family member that's dying and they want to do a last visitation to them. So the parole process was designed to allow them to come into the country on a temporary short-term time and then leave. What President Biden has done in his policies is basically say, well, we're just going to grant parole to everybody coming from countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti. All of them, as now, under current Homeland Security policy, get granted automatic parole, which was never the intention of the parole. And I know it's election year, and I know this is mostly a Republican group, but without getting too political, I mean, this was the stuff that Vice President Harris was supposed to address when she was appointed. Well, I guess they didn't technically call it the borders are, but the media did. But she was supposed to be responsible for addressing the issues at the border and working through this, and it's just not happened. In fact, it's gone the other way. So what we've done in the House of Representatives is we passed a bill called H.R. 2 almost a year and a half ago, which basically said all of these provisions that are currently optional for the president and the Homeland Security agency is make them mandatory. So make it mandatory that you follow this process of you don't seek asylum in the United States if you've come through another country other than your home country. You don't grant parole automatically to people from from certain countries. So that's not been taken up in the Senate. They've not done anything in the Senate in terms of moving forward. Instead of taking up the bill the House passed last November, December, they spent a little bit of time, a couple of Republicans, actually one Republican and a couple of Democrats talking through trying to craft a Senate bill that never even got to a committee hearing. Senator Schumer didn't even bring it to a committee hearing. He's not brought up the House version of the bill, even to make amendments to it and send it back. And so we've got to address our laws. I mean, like I said, we're a nation of immigrants. We're going to continue to be a nation of immigrants, and we want to help that process happen. And we had some good things in a bill unfortunately, it's 2018 now, that would have revised our immigration process and actually helped with the visa process and helped more people get here on work visas through that. And unfortunately, it's fallen by the wayside as all of the weakness in terms of protecting our border has been ignored over the last few years. I want to talk a little bit about trying to keep up with what the slides are as we come up next. One of the other things, talking about the second thing on our top survey aspect, is about the national debt and federal spending. The debt's continuing to grow. Just last month, it crossed over $35 trillion, which I want to talk a little bit about that in context. So $35 trillion, it's got 12 zeros after it if it stopped at 35 trillion. I have a hard time putting up a slide because the number keeps changing so fast. And putting this in a frame of reference, if you put it in dollar bills, you could create 10 stacks that go from the Earth to the moon and reach the moon. If you're counting it in seconds, it's almost 1.1 million seconds in terms of the national debt and where we are right now. And I'll break it down a little bit more in terms of where we're at. We spend, right now, the federal government is borrowing $1 out of $4 that's spent. I mean, which is the thing that's most shocking to me. It's irrational to be at that point, that we're borrowing $1 out of $4 with no projection in sight. If you look at the projections over the next 10 years that both came from the president, from the administration, or has come from the Congressional Budget Office, is that will only increase over the next 10 years through that process. One out of every $4 means we're borrowing $80,000 a second. So in the amount of time it took me to say $80,000, we're another $80,000 in debt, which, if you think about it, is the median household income in Kansas. So in 1 second, we've borrowed the equivalent of the median household income in Kansas. It's just not sustainable. It's not, it can't move forward. So we've got to have some tough decisions, and some of them are tough politically. And the first thing we have to do is make sure that everybody, both us as elected officials, but also citizens across the country, understand it is a problem. I mean, that's the first problem. That's the first step in solving a problem, is recognize you have one and to go through that. And so I'm kind of heartened a little bit that it's moved up and it's second on our survey in terms of priority. When we first started, when I came into office in 2017, early on, that first year or two, it was on the list, but it was 7th or 8th or 9th in terms of top priorities. So it's now becoming recognized that it is an issue that we've got to address and to move forward through that. It's going to require some hard choices. I mean, one, we've got to we get into lots of arguments about appropriations and how much we spend, but that literally is less than 30% of the federal spending is the things that I will get to vote on when I go back this month, is less than 30% of the total spending. So we've got to look at how much should we spend on defense, how much should we spend in Labor Department and Health and Human Services, how big should the bureaucracies be in each of these agencies, but also how do we address Social Security, how do we address Medicare, Medicaid? We all know from looking at just the math that the numbers aren't in line, and yet it takes. Unfortunately, it's too easy to talk politically in terms of saying that, criticizing somebody else on the other side, that they want to take away this benefit, whether it's Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or food stamps or TANF or WIC, and we've just got to figure out how do we keep our economy growing forward, but have a balanced budget and make sure that things work so that we can continue to have those benefits before we run out of money and the ability to borrow money. A lot of this debt is really driven off of spending. Federal spending is driving that aspect. And just looking at that, federal spending in general, but driven by federal spending, actually shows what is the major driver of inflation. And if we look at inflation over the last 3.5 years, and just do a comparison of the month-to-month cumulative inflation, and compare that to the last couple of presidencies over the same time period, and you look in general that prices are up on average 20.2% over the last 3.5 years, compared to the same impact when President Obama was in office or President Trump was in office, and the inflationary impact. Now again, that's the average, which means some things are higher. We've seen it more. Groceries are higher than that for the most part over the last 3.5 years. Gas prices are higher. Housing, depend on when you start the calculation, obviously has an impact as well. Now, if you had your mortgage before 2020, you're probably in pretty good shape on your housing costs. But if you try to go buy a new car or other issues, you're hit by this as the impact. And we're starting to see the negative consequences of inflation in terms of consumer spending. We're seeing not decline, and we have seen for the last year and almost year and a half of the amount of savings that consumers have going forward. They're spending down all of the COVID relief money that was available. We've seen credit card debt increasing. About a year ago, it crossed over $1 trillion for the first time in terms of credit card debt. It's up to about $1.4 trillion now in terms of credit card debt. And we're seeing more and more of the credit card debt being rolled over to the next month, and a smaller percentage of it being paid off each month. And we're starting to see here recently, seeing some more defaults. And I've got some numbers on here. The credit card delinquencies are now at a 12.5-year high in terms of delinquent payments. So not only are people having to put things like groceries and clothes and consumables on their credit card, but they're rolling them over to the next month, which is putting pressure on they don't have the money to pay it back. And so that's an additional concern as we look at, today's financial reports are coming out today in terms of employment numbers are slowing down, and a concern there about just in general in the economy because the consumers are not purchasing what they could 2 years ago with the cash that they have available. And we're seeing that impact in terms of the number of jobs. There was a huge revision, 2 weeks ago, on the amount of jobs that were actually developed over the last year. There were over $800,000 jobs were taken off of the list of what had actually been created over the last year and a half. So obviously we're starting to see some pain points on where we are with the consumer and the impact there. I want to talk a little bit about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and where we are moving forward next year. And one of the things out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was that it accomplished what we said it would do. I mean, we got tax cuts for almost everybody, except for some of the 4 or 5% of the people that did not get a tax cut at the high end of the wage scale. But we got tax cuts for individuals, we got tax cuts for small businesses as well as international businesses, and that we got the economy growing. Thinking back, and I've got a slide up here to talk about that. One of the criticisms of tax cuts that came out of 2017 was that it would reduce the amount of revenue to the federal treasury. And what we've actually seen is that over that time period from just before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed in 2017 through February of this year, is we've actually Yes, there was an initial dip in 2018, and since then, tax revenues have been coming in higher than what was being projected by the Congressional Budget Office, which is the scorecard that we use. And we're continuing to see more tax revenue coming in, and will through the end of next year before some of those temporary provisions expire out of that. So I want to create just a little bit of replant in your mind kind of what was going on in 2017. If you think back to 2017, what was being talked about was that we needed to accept this new normal of economic growth that was less than 1%, that we needed to accept that wages weren't growing. The median wage in America had not grown for 20 plus years through that process. We needed to accept that because we had a higher corporate tax rate, that foreign-owned companies could come in and buy U.S. companies and actually pay for the purchase with the reduction in taxes from the U.S. rate, which was 35%, down to the average of the developed countries, which is about 24%. And so that was the situation that we were trying to address in 2017. So we were trying to look at how do we get the economy growing? How do we get more jobs for Americans? How do we increase wages on Americans? And that's been successful. What we've seen going back to the tax revenue that's come in, one of the things companies were doing was they were putting their intellectual property based in a subsidiary located in another country. Whether you were a U.S.-based company or a foreign-based company, it was cheaper to have your intellectual property, like think about the royalties for your iPhone, for the software purchase or the technology in that. So it was owned by a subsidiary that was located in one of these other developed countries, and then they'd charge a royalty to every time you sold a phone in the United States. That royalty went to the foreign country, whether it was Ireland, whether it was France, whether it was the Netherlands, and therefore the tax revenue went to that other country. What we've seen since 2017 is more of that intellectual property's moved back here because the tax rate's gone down. We've not had a U.S. company bought out through the inversion process by a foreign country since 2017. So U.S. companies are staying U.S. companies. They're continuing to grow. We've seen a huge increase in research and development inside the United States, both by U.S.-owned companies and by companies owned by other countries coming in the United States, starting to research and development. We saw a huge, we've seen 6.5%, over 6.6% growth in R&D expenditures for the first 5 years of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because of that stability around the lower tax rate. Since that time, that's one of the provisions that's already expired in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we're seeing a drop-off. We've seen that's now dropped. R&D expenditures have dropped to less than 0.5% increase year over year. We've seen 14,000 people lose their job in the research and development area because of that. So next year, when most of the individual provisions expire on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we've got to work to renew and extend those. Because if we don't, what we'll see is most Americans will see a tax increase. Businesses will as well, but most Americans will. In fact, in Kansas, just in south central Kansas, in the 4th District, there'll be a $1,930 average tax increase based on the median income in Kansas, in the 4th District. In Kansas, it's actually bigger because you average a little bit more salaries particularly in the Kansas City suburbs. It's a bigger urban area, so you actually see the average a little bit higher. But that's a tax increase if we do not renew and extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And we'll start to lose all of that positive aspects of the economic growth. I mean, we'll start to see a slowdown in the economy, back down to that quote-unquote new normal from years ago, and also see the risk that we're losing companies to foreign-owned businesses. And it's not like our tax rates are the lowest. If you look at the corporate rate, The combined corporate rate, state and local, state and federal taxes in the United States is almost 25% for a corporation. The average across the developed countries, the OECD, is about 24%. So we're above median in that, but because of having a stable environment and having a strong consumer base, companies are willing to participate here and actually have their business here and keep their operations here. But if we go back to 35% on the corporate rate, even if we go back up to 28%, then you add the state rate on top of that, that puts you over 30%, and it makes us much less competitive in terms of what do we do. One of the things we're doing on the Ways and Means Committee, which we have responsibility for all the tax provisions in the House, we've divided up into 10 different teams focusing on different aspects of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I'm chairing the tax team on innovation, basically focusing on things like how do we maintain the positive aspects of the research and development. And it's so critical. Right now, China's giving 200% credit on research and development dollars spent in China, whereas the United States is giving 20%. So literally 10 times the value to invest $1 in China in research and development than it is in the United States. Now they may steal your intellectual property afterwards, but it's cheaper on the front end through that. And what we have seen is China's grown. I mean, they were 9% of the world's R&D expenditure in 1999. Now they're up to 24%. At the same time, the United States has dropped from over 40% down to 30%. So we're just barely ahead of China in terms of the amount of expenditures on research and development. And so we've got to make sure we have our tax code and policies that help grow the economy of the United States and around the world. And so that's a piece that we're focusing on. We've seen such positive aspects of R&D growth by U.S. companies, other companies locating activity here, and we want to continue that. We don't want to lose that value that we've had. So it's going to be important. We're going to talk about that a lot over the next till the end of 2025. Actually doing different things. We've had several roundtables on my innovation tax team, and we're continuing to have. We're going to have a roundtable outside of Washington D.C. next week. And so it's important that we actually talk with how do we make the economy go, how do we keep the economy going forward. I want to take a quick minute and, well, it'll take longer than a minute, just talk about the rest of the year before I get into some questions. So we're headed back to DC next week. Typically we don't have votes in the month of August, which allows members to do a family vacation or schedule trips around their district or around the country or that. And so we're headed back. The biggest thing on the plate right now is appropriations for fiscal year 25, which starts October 1st. And so that'll be on the forefront as we focus on that for the next 3 weeks in September. The House has passed a little over half of the appropriations bills. The Senate hasn't passed any of the 12 bills that fund the discretionary part of the government. There's no way that all 12 of them are going to get passed by the House, passed by the Senate, and signed by the President by the end of September. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I think we'll end up with a continuing resolution, which basically continuing resolution means there's not been an agreement on spending, so we'll continue spending on the exact same programs at the exact same levels for some period of time into the future, and we'll determine what that time into the future is. That's a terrible way to run the greatest country on earth. It means we can't put new programs in place. It means programs that have lived their life and they're no longer useful. You can't redivert that money to something that's more important that you want to look at. The military, they can't buy spare parts. Let's just say we do a CR till February or March, they can't buy spare parts if the lead time for the manufacturing is longer than that 4-month window, 5-month window, because they don't have funding beyond that. You can't schedule training out beyond that deadline for the continuing resolution. So it's a terrible way to operate, but the problem we get into, and this is why they've had 25 years of bad habits of not passing appropriations, because people recognize that if they say we're not going to vote yes unless you put their pet project into the funding, they're not going to vote for it. And so you run this game of chicken that they're running in terms of the deadline. Are we going to shut the government down because we stopped funding, but they're not going to vote for appropriations unless you put their pet project in it. And what's really happened over the last 25 years is we've seen this big growth in spending because those were the decisions that were made to actually keep things going. A continuing resolution or CR is not the right way to go, but it's a whole lot better than having some bloated appropriations bill or omnibus bill that spins things that, we've already gotten out of control through this process. So what I expect to have happen is there'll be probably a continuing resolution to sometime after the first of the year. What's being talked about right now, and I think it's going to happen, is that the SAVE Act, which has already passed the House of Representatives, will be included in that continuing resolution that we pass out of the House. Just as a quick overview, currently today, and the SAVE Act deals with voting rights, and particularly that citizens have the right to vote as opposed to residents that are here illegally, or residents that are here illegally that are not citizens. Currently, it's against the law for non-citizens to vote. However, and states are responsible for that. States are responsible for cleaning up their voter rolls. But over the years, we've made it easier for people to register to vote, partly with some good intentions. Some of it recently, particularly through COVID, with some political reasons. But so on the voter rolls, we know there's lots of folks that are not registered to vote. If a state says, well, we'll allow you to register to vote when you get your driver's license, that just opens up that Pandora's box. So even though it's illegal, states haven't always had the best tools to scrub those voter rolls. So what the SAVE Act would do is basically continue to say it's illegal for folks that aren't citizens to vote, but also allow some access to some federal databases through the Social Security or other records, so that the state election officials can scrub their rolls of the folks that aren't citizens. So that's the whole purpose of it, is to make it easier for states to follow the law in terms of that. And I know some cities have decided that they're going to allow people that don't have legal residency to be here, which to me is stupid. I mean, first of all, that's a technical term, in case you didn't know that. That's one we use in Washington a lot. No. You think about it from somebody that's here, with illegal access to be in the country, but you also think about it, why would you, if you follow that policy, then basically you're saying, well, diplomats that are here in the country could go vote. If you're saying anybody inside the country can vote on election, or people that are here on a 2-month vacation could vote under those policies that are being implemented at some cities, and a couple of states have done it as well. Now, granted, it's against federal law, but there is not a separate voter registration for federal versus state. So we obviously there's value in that in terms of saying we want to make sure that every legal vote is counted, and only folks that have the legal right to vote do count. Just like we should make sure that legal immigration is easier, as well as illegal immigration is more difficult to do as we go through that. So I'll close with that. Well, I mentioned talk about appropriations. I think we'll do a CR. I think it'll go till March. There's a couple other provisions of things that need to happen. A farm bill that needs to be renewed. Unfortunately, Senator Stabenow's pushing on her pet projects for that. So that's kind of, I think it'll get extended. I don't think it'll be a new bill will be reauthorized. Maybe in a lame duck session after election, we can move on that. But there'll be a lot of things happening between the election and Christmas before we wrap up this session, because we'll have whoever wins the presidential race, which I think it'll be President Trump, but whoever wins will be going through a transition on the presidential side. The Senate, I think the Republicans will win the majority in the Senate, but even if they don't, there'll be an election for who's going to be the Republican leader. So that'll be some time that it takes for the Senate side to go through the process. And then on the House, you do typical reorganization with the leadership there. I think the Republicans will pick up 4 to 5 seats in the House net. I mean, they may lose 1 or 2 of members that are existing, but it'll get a little chaotic there in the lame duck session. So anyway, so that's kind of a quick, maybe not so quick, but an overview of the rest of the year.
All right, Ron, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to have time for a lot of questions. We have a limited amount of time, so be sure and not make a statement. Have a question ready, and we're going to do our Pachyderm members first. We're going to start back here, and I'll work my way this way. Also, I wanted to tell you that this is going to be on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel that's Wichita Pachyderm Club, so encourage you to go there and watch this again, and be sure and share that so we can get not only the Pachyderm Club out, but also Ron out to the public. So let's get some questions started over here.
Hey, Dan.
For all the efforts that you put in. As an engineer, and I'm an engineer, I'm very concerned about the electrical grid and it being hardened against EMP attack, or solar flare. Is there any discussion in Congress to deal with that?
So, on hardening the electric grid, there's some discussion on in Homeland Security and FEMA and some of the discussions around even within Congress around that. There's probably not enough of a discussion around that. When you look at an attack like that, as we've become so dependent upon electronic instruments, use of electricity as a power source, an energy source to do so many things, it's much more critical that we start to think about that. And I know this isn't your question, but it's kind of in parallel. Is a similar scenario with all the cyber attacks. I mean, I think we need to spend a little bit more time looking at the impact of our use of technology and the drivers there. So there's some discussion and conversations around that, but it's probably not at the level it needs to be yet. Yeah.
Hello. The VA has gotten short $3 billion. Are you aware of that?
Yes, and what I am not aware of is why they got into that situation because of the funding, the way we've set up some things. But anyway, I am aware that there's a shortage out there.
Okay. They wrote themselves large bonuses, high-ranking officials. Okay, and it needs to be looked at. Do you feel like you've got a gun to your head? Give us the $3 billion for our veterans don't get paid in October.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of politics that get into certain issues as they come up, and one of those is dealing with veterans. I mean, we all want to make sure that we support our veterans and help provide them the resources that they need to care for. I mean, the service to the country that they did. It's only been in the last week or so that I've seen, like I said, I'm not sure, I haven't seen the background data around what's the driver of that. Some of the things that we've put up in the VA programs are in the automatic spending category, so there shouldn't be a defined shortage of that. What I need to find out some more about is what the other categories might be and how do we go address that.
This is an inflation question, which you shared with me personally the last time you were here. Explain why we go to the store and we see things at 25 to 500% higher, yet somebody comes out with a single digit and that relates somehow to mortgages and stuff. Would you explain that to all of us?
So the way on that graphic that I had of the 20%, each month the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports on a market basket of goods. And basically, they include rent, food, energy, and they break each of those categories down. So food, they break it down into meat. Yeah, if you're going to get that slide back up again, Roman, if you don't mind. Break it down into different categories of food and different categories of energy, electricity, and oil and gas, and that. So on any given month, some of these things will vary widely. So that's just a cumulative of each month to month. The media typically reports 1 year to the next. So if they're just reporting the August numbers, they will report 1 year from August of this year to August of last year. So you'll see that there's a bit of a flattening of that curve. It's still going up. It's just not going up as rapidly as it was. Now, what that does is it breaks down, when you look at that on a monthly basis, there's a lot of things in there that are somewhat volatile. Oil and gas, I mean, oil prices can vary all over the place. Food prices can vary all over the place. And so on any given month, you may have one thing goes up and another one goes down, and playing through that. Now, that doesn't reflect what you spend personally, because depends on your life. You may have your house paid for. So housing cost isn't a driver, but you're still hit by food, if you go to the grocery store, or by other items as well, energy through that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, although it's reported as a one-size-fits-all. Yes?
Yeah, U.S. Constitution, Section 4 allows Congress to modify state election laws. So would you promote having at the closing of polls, no more ballots can be counted for federal elections?
So I hadn't thought about it from a federal law standpoint of that. I am a supporter of the polls close on election day, and that's the end. And I'll use as my frame of reference, I'll use the state of Florida. I mean, Kansas has got some pretty good election laws. Florida's got a little bit better around that. I mean, they cleaned up. They've modified their laws a lot after 2000 election and some of that. You know, at 8:30 on a presidential election night, Florida reports 6 or 7, 8 million votes counted and reported. So, you know, while the rest of the states are using small numbers, they have a huge number of votes that they're reporting. And it's because they're counting the mail-in ballots as they come in and setting those aside, waiting till election day to report those. And then when the polls close, with the technology that we have today, whether you're using a paper ballot or whether you're using a machine, you have that technology. I understand somebody saying the comment about, well, the mail might not get there if you drop your ballot on Monday, even before election, it may not get in. But we've got that same issue with if you mail your bill for your mortgage or you mail your bill for your car payment, you know there's a few days you need to allow for the postage to get there on time. And we talk a lot about the right to vote and about other rights. We also need to talk about responsibility of different things, whether it's voting or other. Yeah.
Ron, thank you for joining us this morning on KNSS. For those who didn't listen, Ted Woodward asked you about the 800,000 jobs Biden and Harris have been running on, all the jobs they quote-unquote created, and then all of a sudden 800,000 disappeared. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that happened?
Yeah. So, you know, every month, like I said earlier, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports a lot of statistics around things. Mostly they try to report very quickly statistics. One of those on the number of jobs created, they do what's called a household survey. The household survey is completed by the third week of the month of, in this case, the month of August, which is basically you call households and ask if they've been working. And then once a year, they come back in and add up the total numbers and do a comparison at that point in time. 3 weeks ago, they did the annual cleanup, if you will. And as you said, there's over 800,000 jobs that had been reported as being created, weren't new jobs that had been created. I mean, that was falsely reported. So that, I forget what the numbers, that broke down to about 68,000 jobs a month in terms of the numbers that were erroneously created. So this 800,000 number was the biggest error since 2012, I believe, in terms of number reporting. And I think back in 2012, part of that error was reported. Some of the Bureau of Labor folks were falsely reporting data intentionally through that process in order to make it sound like the economy was growing better during the re-election year for President Obama. And so what concerns me about the numbers, one, we need to improve our processes so that they're as accurate as possible, and trying to figure out what that trade-off is of timeliness and accuracy. But we also need to make sure that just keep an eye on the economy. I'm starting to be a little bit concerned about as we're seeing the amount of consumer saving drop so drastically, and we're seeing the impact that people don't have money to keep the economy going, let alone pay for their kids' school and clothes and food and energy and other things. So that's a concern of mine as we watch going forward. And as I mentioned earlier, the delinquencies going up on credit cards and car payments. So that's a piece as we're looking at jobs number. The jobs number was reported lower for the month of August than was projected through that. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that as well.
Okay, push the band back here.
Thanks again for coming here today. That's a great presentation. Going back to Newt Gingrich's balanced budget, back to the mid-90s with Clinton, what's your view on the possibilities and the prospects of recreating a balanced budget act as Newt Gingrich had done in the mid-90s? And who would be the key players? And what are the what does the field look like? What would be the voting ahead for that?
Yeah. So as we look at the budget and what do we do going forward in that, how do I say this politely? You would never run your own business or your own household the way the federal government runs its appropriations and budgeting process. Most of us think of a budget as, okay, so that's the plan. That's how much money's coming in. That's how much I'm going to spend. Well, that's not exactly the way it works in the federal government. We create a budget, but it never has to be passed. So if you create a budget, it doesn't really have to be passed. And even if it is passed, then when it goes to the authorizing committees, like Armed Services or others, they authorize a dollar amount. It might be different than that. And then the appropriations, when you actually make the final decisions of how much to spend, that may be a third different number that's completely different to that. So it's the process is kind of broken through that. If just focusing on the budget around that, there are some of the things that are structured in the current Budget Control Act, which was created back in 1974, that actually incentivizes spending more money and continuing to grow more and not accurately capturing and saying this is how much we're going to spend and no more. And so one of the things that Chairman Jody Arrington, I'm also on the Budget Committee through that, working with Chairman Arrington, and there's a big push on, one, how do we reform the budget process in general, but also how do we reverse, he uses the phrase reverse the curse, because one of our founding fathers, Madison, or was it Monroe, said that a debt is a public curse. Public debt is a public curse. And so Jody uses the phrase, let's reverse the curse of that debt. And so we're working on that as we go through the budget process. I will say this, on Budget Committee, there are a handful of Democrats that are on the committee that are also concerned about it. And I work with a few of them on a bipartisan fiscal forum group that we're on, trying to talk about how do we address this moving forward. knowing we've got these lightning rods for Democrats and lightning rods for Republicans, and we've got to figure out how do we sort through this, but it's going to take time. It's like turning a battleship around. It takes time to start that. So we've got to start bending that spending curve where we're spending more than what's coming in revenue.
Okay, I got a question from Myron.
Yeah, simply put, Trump was shot in July. It's now September. To my knowledge, the House hasn't even been in session or done anything officially. The Senate has. If it's going to be 2-3 months after an event before Congress even looks at it, how can we rely on Congress to get anything done economically and speedily?
Yeah, I mean, the tough part in terms of timing on the schedules, one of the things that is a problem right now is there's too many things that happen automatically, which makes it easier for Congress not to have to take some hard votes on some decisions. And it is difficult. I mean, some of these things are political will, and I mean, in any district, there's people that have opinions on you ought to support this versus you ought to oppose that. And, even here, I get different opinions as well in South Central Kansas about what those issues are. So I'm a little concerned that things are just going to run their course through the end of the year with not much different of anything other than, like I said, we've got to address the continuing resolutions on appropriations side, and then the Farm Bill and flood insurance program renewal and a couple other things that will expire address that. But other than that, I think there's a lot of people holding their breath. Bless you. A lot of people holding their breath until the election, and then the directions might be different depending on the outcome of the election. Do that. So. All right. Is that it? Well. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Look, thank you all. This is always great to be able to get back and just talk about different issues. I mean, you're a group that likes being able to focus on what things are really happening. So, and that's kind of what we put a focus on as well. So thanks. All right.